Disclaimer number one, I already filmed this video yesterday, but I kept overanalyzing it and overthinking it. Wow, it's almost like I have anxiety. I also want to mention I do have a self-care routine for mental and physical health coming out in the next few weeks. So if you're into mental health stuff, this is kind of the story of like the negative and like the sad stuff, and then in a few weeks you can see kind of the things I do daily to maintain my mental and physical health the best that I can. There you go. Disclaimer number two, this video is obviously touching on PTSD, anxiety attacks, all those kinds of things. So if any of that is triggering for you, this isn't the video for you. There's lots of other more positive, uplifting videos on my channel. So click out now, fair warning. Number three, my hands are orange. I had a bad fake tan experience, so we just need to not talk about that in the comment section below. Don't worry, I'm aware. My hands are like little carrot hands. And disclaimer number four, I'm not a doctor. I'm just somebody who lives with this diagnosis and want to share my personal experience. Now, I think a lot of people hear PTSD and they think of veterans, which is fair. Unfortunately, a lot of veterans live with PTSD, which, if you don't know, is post-traumatic stress disorder. So I think for a long time it was thought that like those were the only people who lived with PTSD. And I still think in some ways there is that kind of stereotype or idea that some people still hold, but that is not the case at all. Anybody can experience PTSD for any number of reasons. So I got my formal diagnosis 7 years ago, and I actually previously had made a video about my PTSD journey near the beginning of my channel 6 years ago, but I was still within the first year of my diagnosis and it was still very fresh and I was still really in the thick of it, and so that video for me now is very triggering, so I believe I have privated it. I don't even want to go search for it to see if it's privated because it's that triggering for me to think about, so there might be another video from many years ago still out, or if you've been an OG around for a long time, you might have seen me make this video many years ago. Being 7 years into it, I want to kind of sit down and talk about it now and reshare kind of the experience, because over these 7 years I've learned a lot, I've changed a lot, I've grown a lot, and I just want to come on here and share my experience. And even though this is something that's really vulnerable and really hard for me to talk about, I think it's very important because there is still a lot of stigma, there is still a lot of stereotypes around it, there is still a lot of people who don't understand, and I know that I touched on it briefly in my recent videos with Jessica, one on her channel and one on mine, and a lot of the comments were like, wow, thank you so much for talking about PTSD, and I really just like touched on it briefly, so I was like, you know what? For months now, I've been wondering if I should remake the video, and then when I did touch on it, so many people were saying thank you that I was like, wow, it's just the time. It's the time to finally sit down and just like remake the video and talk about it again. And it's also funny, like, I feel like there's a lot of people who have like commented on some of my things where like okay, this video where I talk about like how I really hate Halloween. And a lot of people commented and they were like, Molly, it's called PTSD. And I was like, wow, am I that obvious? Correct, I do have PTSD, which I didn't even talk about in that video. But other people were like, wow, you're so dramatic, like just get over it, just move on. And let me tell you, girl, do I wish I could. Like, there are so many times when I wonder like why my brain is like this and wonder why I can't just move on and let it go. But like, that's just not how my mind works. My brain has held on to trauma, my brain has stored trauma, and when I don't want it to, my brain expresses that trauma. And I can't control that. I've worked really hard to get to where I am today in my journey and to be as like healed or this far into recovery as I am. But recovery is a journey and it has ups and downs, and I still have triggers, and you know, I still struggle at times, and that's just part of the journey. And I would say, honestly, like probably the hardest part of having this is the guilt that I feel, is the times when I feel that I am a burden to the people that I love, like my friends and my family and my partner, when I'm not doing well or when I am having like a trigger or a meltdown. You know, like that guilt, that feeling of like, why can other people go through a lot and be okay, but I can't be? That's really hard to deal with. And I think it's just so important to live with empathy for others and not live with judgment, because in that video I didn't explicitly say that I have PTSD. So there was people who like immediately knew and recognized that I had PTSD, and there was people who judged me. And I think it's so important to remember that we really don't know what anybody is going through on a daily basis or just in their life in general. And whether it's, you know, like when you're stuck in traffic and somebody cuts you off or whatever, like I think it's always just so important to let go and to live with empathy and forgiveness and to be kind. And it's so much better, it feels so much better in your own heart to put kindness into the world than to put judgment into the world. And so I just want to share my experience, because I know that it might help people who are earlier in their PTSD journey, and it might help people who are seeking a diagnosis to feel less alone or more understood. It might help people whose family members have this diagnosis and they're trying to navigate how to support or trying to understand their situation and their feelings better. And so those are all the reasons that I just want to sit down here and tell my story. And I'm sure you already see the time code. It's probably a long video, so buckle up, grab some tea. I have mine over here. Green tea. Oh, this probably matches me, Mom.
Oh, yes it does. And the background. That's amazing.
Side note, so many people are always afraid of all the like cacti I have in my apartment and all the plants. They're all fake. Every single.
Don't ruin it.
I won't hurt myself, I promise. I'm PMSing. It'll be a miracle if I get through this video without crying, but I'm determined. Yesterday I did not make it. I'm determined. I've already gotten farther into the video without crying than I did yesterday, so that's a good sign. First off, as I said, I got my formal diagnosis 7 years ago. Knowing what my triggers are, knowing my reactions, knowing my personal symptoms, because again, it's important to note that two people with PTSD will have very different symptoms and very different experiences. Of course, there's the overarching list of symptoms. I'll pop them up right here. But that doesn't mean every single person will experience all of those. And to be fully upfront, my full diagnosis is PTSD with OCD tendencies and generalized anxiety. So I have like a bit of a cluster there. And so my experiences and the symptoms and side effects that I have from it are going to be different from another person. And so knowing like the symptoms that I live with, and particularly when my situation was at its height, I personally believe that I developed PTSD when I was 8 years old in an accident that I had. But at that time, that would have been like 2004, diagnosing children with mental illness certainly wasn't something that was very common. And my PTSD has a lot of physical symptoms, which again is relatively common. And so I think it can be hard to diagnose and it can go undiagnosed for a while because you're looking at the physical. And so you don't dig to the mental, you don't dig deeper to the mental. And so I had an accident when I was 8 years old that greatly changed my life, and I had to start using a cane full time from then on. And immediately from that accident onwards, I couldn't sleep. Like literally couldn't sleep. I would just pace. I would be up all night. Or if I would sleep, I'd have very bad nightmares and wake sleep, to the point where I had to, here, this photo right here, I had to go for a 2-night sleep test in hospital with like all these electrodes hooked up to me because that's how much I could not sleep following that accident. I also would get a lot of nausea, unexplained nausea and stomach aches. Have to like leave school, leave sleepovers for nausea and stomach aches that were unexplained. The sleep test gave no results, like no conclusive results that anything was actually wrong with my sleep cycles, my brain-wise. So yeah, I believe that I had PTSD back then, but I wasn't diagnosed until 20, which was following another accident. When I was 20 years old, I had a workplace accident, or was it just after my 21st birthday? It's hard to remember. Either way, I was either 20 or 21, and I had a workplace accident, and I didn't really think it was a big deal. I walked off a 5-foot stage, and I landed on concrete on my side. And I ended up physically injuring myself, but even that, because it was mostly muscular damage, I didn't fully feel until like 24 hours later, because as I learned from that accident, when you have muscle or tissue damage, you don't necessarily feel the pain until up to a full 48 hours later. So I fell off the stage during my sound check, which is when I would take time to, do my mic check, my slideshow check, and I would walk out the stage. I would figure out how much space I had to work with so that I wouldn't fall off the stage. Now, I've been public speaking since I was 5, one of my biggest passions in life, and I never had any problems. I've literally been on thousands of stages, if not the very high hundreds in my life, and at that point I was a full-time motivational speaker. I was about a year and a half into being a full-time speaker, and I was doing up to 10 speeches a week, so this was very normal to me. And this is the first time anything like that had ever happened. So I fell off this 5-foot stage. I had my presentation starting in 10 minutes, and I literally did 2-hour-long keynotes that day. So that tells you, like, I really thought I was fine, like, it happened, everybody was shocked, the 6 people that were in the room, like, ran to me, I got an ice pack, I kind of, like, laughed it off, I called my boyfriend at the time, my parents, and I was like, you'll never believe what happened. And my mom and dad immediately didn't think it was funny. Like, both of them immediately thought of the accident that I had when I was 8 and what happened following that accident. They're very intuitive, very instinctual, because that's pretty much what happened. I started getting treated for the physical injuries that presented, but I didn't take a medical leave. I took a few days off, I think, to get some physical treatment. I had to wear, like, a foam neck brace and stuff, but in general, like, I didn't take time off. I just went back to start speaking, and that's when I noticed things weren't right. I have never experienced nervousness to public speak. I get asked about how to deal with, like, nerves when public speaking a lot. I've never dealt with them, to be honest, or I hadn't. Because I've been doing it since I was 5, it was just second nature to me. It's what I loved. I did stage performance and acting classes all throughout growing up. I would do plays. Like I said, did a lot of public speaking. I did dance on stages, and being on stage and performing was just something I loved. It never caused me anxiety. But now all of a sudden, before I would go up, I would get, like, really bad nausea. I would get super nervous. I would even have diarrhea, like, just really nervous. And then as the days went on, things started getting worse and worse and worse. So when I would go on stage, and this is what's hard about it, like, having a PTSD attack, is it's generally, at least in my case, I'm fully aware that my thoughts are irrational or that my behavior is irrational, but I can't control it. And that's what's frustrating, is I'm aware that it doesn't make sense, but that doesn't stop me from feeling these things and doing these things. And so I would go on stage and I would just freeze. I would physically feel like I was falling if I took a step. And in my head, I would feel like I couldn't move. It was like I would tell myself, like, if you take a step, you will fall. Like, there's a magic hole in the stage. And I would be 3 feet from the edge, and I would know that. And I would tell myself, like, you can't even step backwards. Like, I would be afraid to step backwards when I had a whole stage behind me. I just hit the cactus. Glad I mentioned it's fake. Or I would tell myself I couldn't step to the sides, even though, like, the stage was plenty wide, But I just would freeze and feel like I couldn't do it. And then things continued to get worse. I remember one of the worst nights, I was actually speaking at Nelly Furtado, the singer. I was speaking at Nelly Furtado's birthday, and I had to write a custom speech for it. And again, writing speeches is what I did. Like, I did it constantly, writing, memorizing, performing. That was my daily routine. And I was at my parents' place. I lived alone at the time, but because I was quite unwell, I was kind of, like, staying with my parents quite a bit because they were helping me get to appointments for, like, treatment for my neck and shoulder and stuff. I remember sitting in my room writing, like, typing on my laptop this speech, and the way I explain it is it felt like the words were, like, falling off a cliff. So I would start a sentence and everything would just disappear. Like, I would completely forget where I was going. The train of thought would just be, like, gone. Words would disappear from my mind. I literally couldn't finish any thought. No thoughts were finishing. They'd start and I'd have a clear place that I was going with it, and then they're gone. And I remember running upstairs and curling in a ball at the top of the stairs and, like, physically holding my head, yelling to my dad that I couldn't do it. I couldn't write this speech. And I said to him, I feel like my brain is broken. That's literally what I said. I feel like my brain is broken. I can't do it. I can't think. None of the words are coming to me. And he was like, it's gonna be fine. He wrote my speech for me. He's a great speechwriter. He taught me how to write speeches. So he wrote the speech. My mom helped me memorize it, drove me down to my apartment in Toronto that night, helped me get ready, brought me to Nelly Furtado's birthday, did my presentation. It all went fine as it could be. I got myself out of there as soon as I could. I did not stay for the festivities, and things were just getting worse. I couldn't eat. I've talked a lot about that. When my anxiety is really bad, I can't eat. I get very severe nausea and stomach pains. And when I have panic attacks, one of my major symptoms is I feel like I'm going to vomit. Like, I have to be in the bathroom. It's my safe space. I can't smell food. I can't hear people talking. Like, I really need silence. Nobody touch me. I just need to be alone and focus on my box breathing. Anyway, so I wasn't eating. I was in a really bad place, and I had to go to England. And I remember my mom helping me. We were going to doctors, and I was telling them about this nausea I was feeling and like all of these physical symptoms, but we weren't getting any results. Like, we weren't figuring out what it was. And I remember my mom just sitting with me in my bedroom at a chair, an armchair in the corner, and she'd been helping me like pack up my bags for my flight the next day with kind of like what I call my safe foods, which are foods that I feel comfortable eating when I have very bad anxiety, which is very simple foods with very minimal flavor that are easy to eat. So things like arrowroot baby cookies, goldfish crackers, things like that. So she was helping me pack my bags, Welch's fruit gummies, and she was Googling a bunch of my symptoms. She's like, how are you feeling? So I'm like telling her, she's Googling these symptoms, and this is one of the only times that Google was right. And she starts reading off this longer list to me, and I was like, yes, these are all me. And I was like, what is it? And she was like, it's PTSD. And I think when a lot of people particularly get mental health diagnoses, they feel like it's a real negative thing. For me, it wasn't. It was like a relief. It felt really empowering to feel like there could really be an answer. And when I have an answer, I can do something about it. I can actively work to get better. But if I don't know what's wrong with me, I'm just stuck in this vicious cycle of feeling sick and not knowing how to get better. And so when my mom said that, it was like, okay, we might be able to do something. And at the time, I was in cognitive behavior therapy, and my mom reached out to my therapist, and he was like, yeah, I absolutely feel like that's what's going on. He wasn't able to formally diagnose me, but he advised that I needed to go on a medical leave. His opinion was that if I continued to work, which I was on a downward spiral. As I said, things progressively were getting worse over this course of just a few weeks, like 2-week span, 2.5-week span from the accident to this trip to England. Every speech I did was progressively getting worse. And he said if I continued to work, I was going to potentially damage my brain forever or very long term. And it was going to be really hard to reverse that damage. But if I took a medical leave and I worked on it and I healed and I gave my brain a break, I could rebuild my life. So I didn't have a choice. Like, I had to get on a plane that day. And also, I don't believe he couldn't write the medical note, right, Mom? I had to get it from my actual doctor.
Yes.
Yeah, so what he did was he wrote a medical note for me to give to my doctor, who could write the actual medical note that would get me out of work. So we couldn't get that done. Like, I had to go to England. Also, my boyfriend at the time was studying abroad in Wales. And so this was the only time within 6 months I was going to get to see him. So like, I wanted to go. He took a week off school to come to London to see me. I took a week off work following to go to Ireland to introduce him to my family. It was my long-term partner at the time. So I wanted to go even though I was really sick. And my mom and my boyfriend were in communication. My mom was telling him, like, these are the things you need to have, like a blender to blend smoothies, frozen fruits, all of these things. And he was amazing. He made sure to have all of that there and ready for me when I landed. Nuts, things like high protein nuts and things like that, protein bars, all of my like safe foods. And yeah, I remember getting there, and it was a really rough trip. It could be a whole video of its own. It was very challenging. I had one more speech left because the first part of the trip was work. I think it was 4 or 5 days of work, and then I had 10 days off to just be on a vacation with him. And I remember I had one speech left and I was just so sick, like I could not do it. And I called work and I said, I like really can't do this. And it was so interesting. It was like the moment I knew I was on vacation and I wasn't gonna have to keep doing this speaking. I literally ate an entire pizza that night. Like an entire large pizza. All of a sudden, like this relief of knowing like I wasn't going to have to get on a stage and perform was like this massive weight lifted on me. And I definitely was like nowhere near out of the clear, but like I remember that night it was like really big. And anyways, when I got home, I was supposed to go to California, do an event with Selena Gomez and this whole thing. And I ended up going to my doctor, getting that note, and I went on a 6-week medical leave. And over that 6 weeks, I continued cognitive behavior therapy, but I also got back into talk therapy, which is something I had done years prior for a long time and really loved. And through that, my doctor, my psychologist, and my cognitive behavior therapist really, at a certain point in my journey, encouraged me to seek the help of medication. And it was really hard for me because I got through my depression without medication, and in my mind, like if I could do that, I could do this. But I was at a point where I had already quit my job because I couldn't handle it. My guide dog passed away unexpectedly. Like it was really bad. I left my apartment and moved back in with my parents. And I was at the point where I wasn't living. I wasn't functioning. Every day was a cycle of waking up, trying to get as much food into me before my anxiety hit, and then waiting for my first anxiety attack, healing from my first anxiety attack, waiting for my second anxiety attack, having my second anxiety attack, and then like going to bed, taking a sleeping pill and going to sleep. And I was hardly eating. I could hardly leave my house. Like I wasn't living. And my team was like, you know what, like your brain chemistry at this point is so out of line. There isn't a way to naturally get it back. You have to have medication. And I went to a psychiatrist. Between what, you know, the rest of my team had already kind of come to the conclusion of, and then his evaluation, he gave me the diagnosis of PTSD with generalized anxiety and OCD tendencies. And so I didn't really touch on my OCD tendencies, but I basically just had exactly what you would think. I had obsessive and intrusive thoughts and behaviors that I could not control. I think that was probably one of the hardest things for my mom to deal with, was like my obsessive thoughts and behaviors, but I truly had no control over it. It was just like a cycle in my head that I couldn't stop. So I went on 5 milligrams of, I'll just say I was on Cipralex. You know, doctors often tell you when you start an SSRI that it'll take up to 30 days to start to feel a difference. In looking up SSRIs, again, I'm not a doctor, it did say online, like, it starts to chemically change your brain within 3 hours of taking the first pill. I was a different person within hours.
Yeah.
Within hours, I was a different person. Within days, I was normal. Or like a new normal, you know? Within days, I was functioning again. I was coming back to life. And taking that medication gave me my life back. And if I hadn't taken it, I know despite the fact that I was seeking treatment, I would have continued to spiral and probably honestly just ended up in hospital eventually, because I wasn't eating, I was losing weight, I wasn't functioning. And so for me, taking the medication was the right choice. It's not for everyone, it's personal for everybody, but I'm glad I did it. I've now been medication free for about 1 year. And you guys know I've been honest that this year has been really tough on my mental health, and part of that has been coming off SSRIs for the first time in many, many years. And even though I was on 5 milligrams, so that's like half the smallest pill that they have of Cipralex, the withdrawal was still like very real for me. It was really hard, and I'm learning over this last year to rebalance my brain, to handle emotions myself when I don't have a chemical balancing my emotions for me. And so it's been a big transition for me, but I'm really proud of how far I've come. At this point in my journey, I have 0 flashbacks or problems with speaking. I love speaking. I've been back doing it again for many, many years. With no problems. I don't get anxious or nervous before I speak. When I'm on stage, I don't have that feeling of freezing or feeling like I'm gonna fall, which I'm really happy, because when I got to the point of realizing I needed to quit my job at the end of that 6-week medical leave, when I went in to quit, it was one of the hardest things I'd ever done because that was my dream job. And I thought at 20, my life was over, like my dream was over. And if anything, it just really got me closer to my true dream, because quitting that job is the reason I started YouTube. Not being able to speak anymore is the reason I started this channel. And so even like the scariest, darkest things can actually be a weird blessing in disguise. When I quit, I was scared I was never going to be able to do it again. And I'm very happy to say that I have no problems. That said, I definitely still have triggers. I would say my biggest trigger is medical. And I've just learned how to cope with it. The moment I know I have to walk in, even just to get like my ear checked for an ear infection or a COVID test, like my heart starts pounding, my hands start to sweat. But I've learned that what I need to do is just communicate with the doctor and say, hey, I have PTSD. One of my triggers is medical, so like I just need to have everything talked through with me. And generally, like I've had a lot of success with that. Doctors tend to be very kind and empathetic once I just explain the situation, and that the best thing they can do is just like give me as much control as I'm allowed to have. Often the way we do it is they will tell me, these are all the steps, and it's hard because they can't show me things, right? They can't show me tools. They can't show me a diagram. They can't point. Oftentimes I can't touch things because it's sterile. And so I'll just have them talk me through everything, like what each step is. They'll often tell me like, you get to tell me when we move on to step 2. So they'll say like, when you're ready, let me know. And then I'm gonna do this. And then I let them know I'm ready. They do that, and they say, when you're ready for next step, you tell me, and this is what I'm going to do. Then I'll say I'm ready. So usually that really helps me. The more control I have, the better I feel. But I think often when somebody has grown up in the kind of medical field, like having a lot of medical tests and procedures done, like I did, it goes one of 2 ways. You're either like immune to it and nothing phases you or bothers you, or it's quite triggering for you and it's a traumatic thing. And for me, I've been seeing specialists and going to hospitals for tests and stuff since I was 6 months old. The final photo of my baby book is me at 6 months old in a blue hospital gown going in for an MRI. So for me, unfortunately, it isn't. I didn't become immune. Wouldn't that have been nice? I went the opposite direction, and it's very triggering. So that's hard, because even when I know, and I think that's another one that's hard for my mom to see, simple things like getting a COVID test. Like I'll often, when I had to get a COVID test, like the nasal swab one, I was curled in a ball, crying, hyperventilating, and I know it's irrational. I know it's not a big deal. I know it's fine, but it just doesn't stop my brain from being like, this is what's gonna happen now, and having a trauma response. So I definitely have things like that. So medical is my biggest trigger at this point in my life, but I'm just actively continuing to work on figuring out like how to make it the easiest it can be for me and how to properly explain it to other people that need to know when they need to know. And then another trigger for me is just like a lot of the bullying that I experienced growing up. So things like Halloween being like a really negative triggering thing for me, or sleepovers. That was always really hard for me because A, I was often bullied at sleepovers, and then B, I would be in a strange environment because I was always night blind. I would go from showing up at their house at 2 p.m. and being able to see to being totally blind and not being in an environment that I was unfamiliar with and not being able to get around and feeling stuck and trapped. And so eventually in childhood, I just stopped going to sleepovers by my choice. I didn't want to, and that carries on to this day. Like even with friends, they'll be like, oh, let's have a sleepover. And I'm like, you can sleep over at my house, but I'm not gonna sleep over at your house. And it's interesting because hotel rooms, no problem. Somebody's actual house, I don't like it. I don't like sleeping over at other people's houses. It's just not a thing for me. So I've just learned what I can tolerate, what I can't, and how to be my best self and live my best life, and how to constantly work towards improving. And that's what I do. So that's my experience. That's all I can think to share with you. If you have any follow-up questions, I'll pin a comment below to ask for questions about any of my mental health journey, whether it's my situational depression that I dealt with earlier in my life or any of this stuff. Please comment and I can do like a whole mental health related Q&A video. I also want to mention that I have a self-care routine coming out in the next few weeks. Self-care for my mental and physical health, things that I do on a daily basis to continue to be my best self and work towards being the healthiest I can be, mind, body, soul, spirit. So hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to be notified when that video comes out, or if you want to join this channel. And you know, I talk about mental health and whatnot on here and lots of other things. And I hope that if you have PTSD or you're seeking a diagnosis, this has helped you feel seen and heard in some way. And I hope that if you have a family member or loved one who deals with PTSD, this has maybe enlightened you or helped you understand a little bit better what it feels like and what the experience is like. That's all I can think of to say. If you would like to see a video with my cat, you can check out this video right here. If you would like to know 5 things all sighted people should know about blindness, you can check out over this. You can check out over here, this video right there. There you go.